Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Claudia Fonadraber. I'm the founder of KODA. Please note that this webinar is presented in English with simultaneous interpretation in Spanish by Babilla Collective. Simply click on Interpretation on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to select your preferred audio channel, English or Spanish.
El webinar será en vivo en inglés y con traducción simultánea en español del colectivo Babilla. En la parte de abajo de la pantalla, haga el clic en la esfera en forma de mundo, interpretación, para seleccionar el idioma.
Also, please share your questions in the Q&A box. We will address them at the end of the panel as time allows. Before we start, I would like to thank Humanities New York for their support of this program. This panel has been organized by KODA. We are a New York-based social practice residency dedicated to supporting artistic and professional growth of mid-career artists. The event was organized in partnership with New York Foundation for the Arts. NYFA works to empower artists at critical stages in their creative lives. The event was also organized in partnership with the Rainforest Alliance, represented today by Jungwon Kim. Prior to joining the Rainforest Alliance, Jungwon worked as a journalist and served as the lead editor at Amnesty International, USA, for 10 years. She currently leads the creative and editorial team at the Rainforest Alliance, guiding a cohort of designers, writers, and video producers in the creation of multimedia content that showcases the mission impact of the organization's work around the world. The Rainforest Alliance is an international NGO that works to advance sustainable and regenerative agriculture, protect forests and biodiversity, promote human rights, and improve rural livelihoods. Thank you for moderating today's panel discussion, Jungwon.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thanks to KODA Lab for inviting me to be part of this interdisciplinary conversation today on some of my most favorite topics: food justice, the role of art and culture in changing our world, and our relationship to nature. I would like to start by introducing visual artist Lina Puerta, who was raised in Colombia and is now based in New York City. Lina explores the relationship between nature and the human body through multi-layered paintings and sculptures made from concrete, clay, resin, wood, foam, fabric, artificial plants, paper pulp, and handmade paper, crafts, and all kinds of recycled items. Her work deals with themes of control, consumerism, and the fragility of life. She allows the physical qualities of her materials, like their textures, their forms, and their colors, to guide her process, which is also informed by concepts of femininity, fashion, sexuality, and artificiality. In 2017, Lina embarked on a series of tapestries featuring farm workers and agricultural themes, something that we'll be talking about more during our conversation today. You can learn more about her work and see her work at linapuerta.net. Lina, welcome. Would you start by telling us about why you decided to make work about farm workers?
Thanks so much, Jungwon, for the wonderful introduction, and for everyone that's tuning in to this panel. And I also want to just say that I'm really honored to be sharing this panel with you, Jungwon, and with Karen. And thank you so much to all the organizers' hard work. Yes, I started this series of what I call the Latino Farm Worker Tapestry series. And right after the 2016 presidential election, before this, I my work throughout my career was more centered around the idea of nature and the body. But due to the anti-immigrant rhetoric that was so much part of the 2016 election, I felt the need as a Latina to do something that would highlight the contributions of Latinx people in the US. And I honestly didn't know how to go about it, how to approach it. But in early 2017, an organization called the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is a non-profit organization based in Oxford, Mississippi, that studies food through culture. They asked me for a proposal for their annual symposium, and they commission an artist annually, and it's sponsored also by the 21C Museum Hotels. And for that year, they had a topic for their symposium, which was El Sur Latino. And I was invited to create a proposal of basically the Latino influence, but that had to do with food. So I could have gone in many directions, but because I have an interest in nature, I thought it was perfect to look into farming. And so I did a lot of research and I wrote a proposal, and luckily I was granted the commission, and I was determined to create this work anyway, but anyway, it was wonderful to have the support of Southern Foodways and 21C. So it was 7, if we could go back just briefly, sorry. So there are 7 of these tapestries, and each one is focused on one specific crop. This one is the broccoli, and I included a quote in each one that highlighted the social issues of Latino farm workers in the US. And I also included parts of the plant of the crop, like the leaves, the flowers, the pollinators, and all of these different elements that are part of the cycle of the plant. Thanks. That was a long answer.
Thank you so much, Lina. We'll delve more into this series with our other panelist. I'm delighted to introduce Karen Washington, someone whose work I've been hearing about and following for years now. Karen is a farmer, community activist, and all-around food justice rock star. She is a lifelong community gardener, a board member of the New York Botanical Garden, and she has worked with people in Bronx neighborhoods to turn many empty lots into community gardens. She is the co-founder of Black Urban Growers, also known as BUGS, and the Black Farmer Fund, which supports Black farms and businesses with capital and resources in New York State. Karen is and has always been a vocal advocate of urban garden protection and preservation, and she served as president of the New York City Community Garden Coalition. She's also a member of La Familia Verde Garden Coalition, which launched the City Farms Market, and she serves on the boards of the Farm School NYC, Why Hunger, and Soulfire Farm. In 2012, Ebony Magazine voted Karen one of the 100 most influential African Americans in the country. And in 2014, she was the recipient of the James Beard Leadership Award. Since 2014, Karen has been the co-owner and farmer at Rise and Root Farm in Chester, New York. You can learn more about Karen's work at riseandrootfarm.net. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. to start, I would love to ask you, I see a theme weaving through all of this work, and I'd love to ask you why you've dedicated the better part of your entire professional life to this work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and asking me that question, because I had no farming background. My parents weren't farmers, my grandparents weren't farmers. And I came to it by putting my hands in the soil and creating something that I despised at one time, which was a tomato, and my relationship to food, that it always came from a grocery store. And so when I grew that first tomato, first of all, it was red. And then I bit into it. It's changed my world. And I wanted to grow everything. And at that time, I was also a physical therapist. And so what I was seeing is the relationship between food and health. And that so many of my patients who were African-American and Latinx, who came from farms, all of a sudden were having diet-related diseases. And so I started to put two and two together, that has something wrong with this, because the treatment that they were given was medication instead of food. And so when I would, explain to them, I'm a farmer, I grow food, they would say, oh, Miss Washington, that's horrible, it's such hard work. But then when I would talk to them about the food, all of a sudden they said, you know what, you're right. My parents lived till they were 100 years of age. They were never sick a day in their life. We didn't have grocery stores. We went out into the fields to get our food. We didn't have to go to the doctors because we had medicinal herbs that we could use. So right then and there, I knew I was on the right path. But also I started to look at the food system as a whole and found out that I really could not concentrate on food, growing food alone, because it was intersecting so many social issues that were affecting my community. I live in the Bronx. Out of 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranked 62 as the most unhealthiest. And so I knew right then and there that it was not only food issues, but it was issues around health, around economics, around housing, around education, around police brutality, all these social issues that were interconnecting with food. And so for me, I've been on this journey of really questioning the food system, because for so many years, people have been telling me that the food system is broken and it needs to be fixed. And at one time I was drinking the Kool-Aid and believed that. And now I don't. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's a caste system based on race, based on economics, and based on demographics. And so I say to people, the food system does not need to be fixed. It needs to change. And that change is shifting of power. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that in terms of food sovereignty and food justice. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so great to see the interconnections already between both of your areas of work. Karen, I just want to follow up on what you said there. I think in the years, especially following Hurricane Sandy in New York, we really began to see how fragile our food system is here in New York City, and how dependent we are on these very long and complicated supply chains. And also, that disaster brought into such kind of stark relief the disparities between different communities in terms of their access to food. So, in the last 10 years or so, I do have this feeling that people are really talking about food justice and food sovereignty more. Do you feel like it's having a moment in the spotlight? And, can you talk a little bit about the momentum behind this movement?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because it's not only, Hurricane Sandy, it's COVID. I mean, COVID has really brought to the life exactly what essential is. And essential is food workers, food advocates, restaurant workers, grocery store workers, farmers, you have it. And it's really brought to light the importance of food. I said for so long, I think we really take in food as, something to really sort of think about. But in essence, New York City during Hurricane Sandy had only a two-day supply of food. And now with COVID, we understand the importance of food. And so for me, going around talking about food justice, I really wanted to, bring to the forefront is that, a lot of people talk about food justice, but if you look at the definition of food justice, it's really transforming the food system based on inequities and the disparities we see. And so I tell people time and time again, when they ask me or when I ask them about food justice, a lot of people will recite the definition. And I say sometimes it doesn't exist, because in order for you to be doing food justice, the definition transformational means that you have to be actively involved in dismantling the social injustices. And some of the social injustices that you see fall along race, gender, demographic, wealth, understanding the history behind our food system, labor issues, wealth inequalities. So all these different things that we need to work on. But what this COVID pandemic has shown is the importance of food, and the fact that people are now resorting to looking for healthy food, because again, food is medicine. Food is medicine, and they show a great appreciation for farmers that are now growing food, healthy food, and they want to be a part of that. My phone and my email was off the hook of people giving advice. All of a sudden, they want to grow food in their front yard, their backyard, on their windowsill, on their terraces. So this is a great opportunity for us to really, really think about the importance of food. Thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, you said so many really crucial things there, but I want to go back to what you said about farm workers being essential workers. And I think there has been a broad sort of acknowledgement among people that yes, farm workers are essential workers, but our system, our food system has not yet changed to recognize farm workers as such and to treat them as such. I want to ask Lina, what was revealed to you in the process of focusing your series on farm workers who, in this country at least, in addition to the many obstacles that Karen named, also may face obstacles related to their citizenship status, for example. And I think visibility is one of the really big obstacles to farm workers gaining the kind of recognition and labor respect that they really deserve in this country. So what did you discover in your exploration that led up to your creation of this work?
Thank you. Such a
Okay, I think Lina may have.
You can hear me?
Oh yes, now you're back.
Oh,
yes,
sorry.
you're back.
I was saying that that I am moved by the powerful statements that I just heard. Yes, in making I am not a farmer. In fact, when I started making this farm worker series, I questioned and had some. I had second thoughts about it because even though I am Latinx, my family were not farmers. But I think I could relate to the experience more from the immigrant point of view. Like my parents came here and worked in factories here in New Jersey, and understand like what the discrimination and different hardships, and also resilience of the immigrant experience here. So it was, and I did not go into the fields to capture the experience. So it was all basically through reading and going online and doing just my research from far away. But I think through art, it's interesting how through art things can be revealed. And for me, it was important when I made the tapestries, since most of the Latinx farm workers come from Central America, between 85 and 90%. I wanted to include something that would speak of the richness of the culture, because there's so much racism towards basically brown and black people, you know, and I wanted to just bring some of that. So I have collected different textiles from my trips through Central America. I have collected different especially textiles that are made by the current indigenous, mainly women, of Mexico and Guatemala. And I included some of these textures and textiles in it, and I wanted to highlight that. And in doing that, I started to reflect. In the beginning, it was very centered on the Latino farm worker, but I quickly understood, as I reflected on this, I understand that not only the farm worker is basically part of the cycle of the plant. Like, we are part of the plants, because it's easy to, we live in a system where we see it as something separate. We go to the supermarket and we have everything available. But looking, and also a lot of it is, when we think of farm workers, we think of all of the hardship, yes, and it is there. But what I'm trying to say is that we are, I think the plant has a cycle where the pollinator comes and takes the nectar from the flower. And after that flower is pollinated,
just when she got to the juicy part about the birds and the bees, she froze. Lina,
sorry.
oh, there you are, you're back.
Sorry,
Okay,
so I was
great.
saying, so
Yes.
the flower, so that beautiful flower turns into a juicy strawberry. And that is something really beautiful that we all miss out. And in the same way, we, especially with the plants that give us our food and medicine, like Karen was saying, we are crucial to tending and taking care of that plant. You know, we are part of that cycle. So that is something that has come strong in this series, and so from the first works that were more centered on the Latinx farm workers, I am also bringing the plant in as also a living being that we are connected to, and we are connected to it. Inherently, we are connected to it. Except it's simply that in this system we have become disconnected. Yeah. I can't hear you.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's, there is also, I think, growing public awareness about how conventional industrial farming destroys those natural cycles and destroys our connection to those natural cycles. You know, we're learning much more now about how agribusinesses destroy forests to raise cattle for beef and soy, you know, tens of thousands of miles away, that we then see on our supermarket shelves. We are also more aware of the impacts of heavy chemical use in farming, fertilizers, weedicides, those types of chemicals that poison streams and rivers, eventually flowing out into the ocean and killing coral reefs. A lot of the work that we do at the Rainforest Alliance is designed to reduce those really the most harmful impacts on a really wide scale. So, you know, we're not necessarily at the very, very forefront of you know, regenerative farming, for example, but what we are working to do is to reach as many farmers as we can to at least mitigate some of the really harmful impacts of these conventional industrial practices. But when you talk about the cycle of a strawberry plant, for example, or the, you know, just being alive to that relationship between the pollinators, the bees and the birds and the nectar and the blossoms, I think we're sort of touching now a different area of conversation. And I want to just ask, you know, maybe starting with Karen, besides the environmental damage caused by, you know, our current sort of dysfunctional industrial agriculture system, aside from the sort of scientific and environmental impacts, what else have we lost? And I guess, you know, the flip side of that question is, what are you reconnecting to or helping other people reconnect to through your work? But maybe we can start with, you know, what have we lost? And when we become aware of that, maybe we'll become even more motivated to reconnect.
Two things, that's a great question. Two things that we've lost is our relationship to the land. So many of us, especially people of color, because of segregated laws and racism, were pushed off the land. And as a result, as we've come more distant from the land, we've lost that connection and have been relying on an industrial food complex of a subsidized food system and a charity-based food system, both unsustainable. And so as I go around the country speaking, and especially speaking to youth, I tell people, you know, if you got that land in Puerto Rico and Santo Domingo in the Caribbean and down south, you got to hold on to that land, because that land is legacy. That land is power. And I tell young people, if you got those Samsung Galaxies and iPhones, whip them out and go to grandma and grandpa, abuelo, and talk to them about that history to land, because it's so, so important. And you see now a lot of people understand that owning land is powerful. It's your legacy, it's your destiny. And so now you're starting to see a movement when we talk about food sovereignty. Is it right for people to own their own land, own their own seeds, only their own fight and power to grow their own food that's culturally appropriate? Another thing that we've lost is culture. If you look at the word agriculture, we've lost that connection. And so now it's going back to the culture of agriculture. Why do we grow the food that we do? What are some of the indigenous properties that we've had for so long that we used to use that we no longer use? And also understanding our history when it comes to agriculture. As an African American, I was denied that. I was denied my history. My history around agriculture was always around slavery. It wasn't until I started to really pull back the wedges and pull back the veil to find the truth, that why, as enslaved Africans, we were brought here. We were not brought here because we were dumb or because of labor. We were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture. We brought seeds in our hair. We brought tools that are used today. And so when the food that you eat, we were the ones The culinary people, we were the ones that dedicated that diet and the food that you're eating. The agriculture tools that you use, we were the ones that brought that knowledge. And when you say that to a young person, all of a sudden it opens up their eyes, and they now know that they too have a part in the development of this agricultural complex and history around food. And that's very, very important.
Thank you for that. Yeah, one of the very exciting things that happened this week, I think, was the introduction of this Justice for Black Farmers Act, which I'm sure you've all been talking about for a long time. But hopefully it will be at least a small, tiny step toward repairing that, you know, a very, very long history of violent injustice, especially with regard to the earliest presence of Africans on this continent. Well, not the very earliest, but you know, the enslaved Africans who were brought here and worked in agriculture and then were completely disenfranchised of their land much later. So we'll be following that really closely. Lina, when I chatted with you last week, you talked a lot about interdependence and how you have been exploring this theme of interdependence with nature and just really being in dialogue with nature. And I wonder if that also is something that we've lost and something that we can all work to regain, hopefully by shifting our culture, by creating art and music and really talking about this more. Can you go into that a little bit, our relationship to nature?
Yes, I think as Karen was saying, we have, I mean, the question relates very much to what Karen was saying, that what she was saying that happened with Africans when they were brought here, when they were enslaved here. Same thing has happened with the indigenous cultures of the Americas. And for me, that being, I'm not indigenous, I am a mestizo, and being a mestiza, I have indigenous roots, but I grew up in a Western Catholic colonialist system. And it's hard. It's just, you know, and actually through learning about, through this series and through using through using some of these indigenous textiles, I have deepened my interest in indigenous cultures and thinking of how they are so much more, their relationship with nature and the land makes much more sense than our Western ways. Our Western ways are completely unsustainable, and they're, if we do not change, we're not going to make it as a human species. So for me, it's important that we decolonize the land, decolonize our minds, and go back to learning the indigenous ways of our ancestors, which is a big challenge to do, because in my culture, so much of it has been wiped out. But so we have to, but there still are, having said that, there still are many indigenous communities that are there and have always been great stewards and guardians of nature, and are fighting daily and paying with their lives, because like in Colombia, for example, is one of the biggest countries where most are killed. Sorry about my connection. So yes, definitely, I am definitely, for me, it's important to absolutely crucial that in the future we change our ways of relating to nature and seeing nature not just as food, not just as entertainment to go to the park and just clear my head. No, we are nature. Just being more aware of nature in general, and not necessarily.
Okay, I think Lina's connection has faltered a bit. We didn't get that last
Sorry.
part, but I think we are all, approaching the same idea from different perspectives, and talking about the ways in which indigenous cultures, many of which converge here in the Americas because of our history of human trafficking and enslavement and indigenous genocide, really. But there are so many practices of resilience related to agriculture that have survived that quite violent sort of systemic destruction. You spoke last week about certain songs, for example, that farmers sing during the farming cycle. And I wanted to ask in Colombia, and I wanted to ask Karen, aside from the seeds that you talked about that people smuggled over in their hair, for example, or hid when even in the midst of being ensnared in this human trafficking system that was so horrible, but so many things did survive and are kind of important touchstones, especially for Black American farmers. Can you think of other things that have survived? Are there certain traditions or songs or practices, things that have either survived in their original form or maybe changed and adapted and evolved related to farming?
Well, of course, I mean, when Lina talked about the artistry, the music that we had to use to survive, the way that, we sort of communicated, because when we came here, we had to form our own language, because when we came here, we came from different tribes. And so music was a common denominator that was used as a way of communicating. And so some of the original music that you hear today when it comes to jazz and stuff came out of that. Also, I think that we look at land differently. And I think it's really important when Lina talked about not just thinking about a park, but I think a lot of us look at land in terms of this being the stewards of the land. It's not about land ownership. Is it how do we grow in such a way that we pay homage to the ancestors, but also that we take care of it? I mean, it's the capitalistic society has allowed us to make food a commodity, land a commodity. And so a lot of us are sort of distancing ourselves from that because it's been extractive. And we're trying to go back to principles whereby we're not thinking about owning the land, but how do we present ourselves as land stewardship. Also, for me, it's spiritual. When I go out in those fields of rise and root, I'm out there in the open. First of all, I have to acknowledge the planet, have to acknowledge my being a being, and asking permission to be on that land and say to that land that I'm here as a steward to bring health into that land, to use practices of composting, of bringing things back into the land, and having that spiritual connection of talking to the wind, to the element, to the birds, all of these things that we take granted you know, we take granted for. But a lot of those elements come from my past, my ancestral past, that how we intertwine food and nature, and how all of that is part of the healing process that we need so much in today's agricultural system. Saving of seeds. Tell me, how do we allow a handful of companies to own seeds, to patent seeds? Unheard of. Because if you look at who we are seeds, DNA. And so if you allow a handful of companies to patent seeds, they're going to patent us. And so there's a huge movement, a huge undercurrent of new movement of people now saving seeds, because we don't know what the next iteration of this food movement is going to look like. And so I'm glad you brought up that question, because, and Lina too, because it's not about just growing food so you can take a look at, but how our responsibility to the land, to the planet, to the animals, and how it all intertwines. It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah, I mean, this is, in my view, this is the paradigm or the framework that we need for the future. And you are already so clearly embodying that in your work. A question to both of you, really. You know, we see this this future vision, and it's a future vision that Karen and many other people in the movement are already living and embodying. So the future is here now, right? But how do we mainstream this new way of thinking? How do we make this common understanding? How do we make people want this and begin to really press for systemic change? And maybe I'll ask Lina first, because I do think art and culture has an important role to play here.
Well, it's a good question. I think with just having I think there is slowly an awareness happening, and I would add that is looking at nature. I think we can start to, I mean, in many ways, this pandemic has helped us understand that this system is so dysfunctional, and that is so centered on profits and on extractivism. It's so, just thinking about one of the most, I remember one of the very disturbing, of the many disturbing things that came to light during this pandemic is, well, the food scarcity, right? So many families that we know that the food pantries have huge lines, and they've had to, the people that come to pick up groceries have exploded, basically. And at the same time, I remember when the farmers in the Midwest, because they couldn't bring the food to the restaurants because of the restaurant closings, all of the food that was wasted, that was thrown back into the land, basically. That to me is like, that just it hurt. It shows how what a broken system we have, and also what disrespect we have for nature. Like, the disrespect is mind-blowing. And I think we need to start focusing on us as a society, not just farming. Like, all of our ways of living need to shift to a more nature-centered society, where you go to school, where education, it could be local. I would love for kids to learn about, I would like to learn about the birds that come here, which birds come here in this season, which plants grow in this season, what insects come around. Like we can learn, life would be just more enjoyable. We could work less and have better lives, having a more nature-centered instead of money-centered society. I think we need to do that. We must.
Yeah, I really like what you said also about anchoring that kind of environmental education to a specific place and really keeping it local. Going to Karen now, let me just rephrase the question a bit because of your position in all of this, right? We want to change our culture around food production, and we want to also change our systems of food productions. How might we persuade conventional farmers who are doing things in an extractive way to come on over to the other side? Are you in conversation with farmers like that, or do you feel there is more receptivity to doing things in a different way now?
Oh, it has to change because of climate change. I mean, we're running out of land, we're running out of water. And so people who are doing sustainable things such as biodiversity and growing things instead of monocropping, people who are now doing composting, are learning how to use different plants that take less water, not being dependent on fertilizers, and seeing the yields that you get. So conventional farmers are starting to look at what organic farmers are doing when it comes to the health of the soil. We got one land, one topsoil, and it's being depleted. And so if you continue to extract, the land is going to be barren. But if you start putting in systems that help with soil health, then farmers are seeing that. And also they're seeing ways of now farming differently. The problem is, folks, that we grow enough food and we waste enough food. It's not about the amount of food that we grow, it's that how do we grow more efficiently, especially when it comes to using least amount of water and least fertilizing inputs. And that's what you're starting to see. And also I want to get back to the question when you asked about how do you get people to start thinking about changes in the food system. And I've got to really praise Lina, because I don't think she just talked about herself, but I think is really, really important, the artists, how artists and music and poetry at the forefront. That is the universal language that people understand and look at. And also grassroots community organizing, folks. That's how I get the message. That's how I get the message. Meeting people where they are, coming up from those ivory towers and going into communities, especially marginalized community that have no idea what climate change is all about, composting, why should we be doing this, and making it real to their well-being in their society. And also coming from a point where we've always been thinking about individuality, we have to start going from the I to the we, because we have to do this together. It's going to take a village to move the food system in such a way that is more conducive to the well-being of the planet. And that's what we have to do. And for me, it's grassroots organizing, getting into the trenches, making people aware, going into school, the churches, the synagogues, and start talking about the economy. Right now, what this pandemic has done, we're not going back. We know who the essential workers are. We know the emphasis on how important food is. We cannot go back. We see the wealth disparity and the wealth inequality that people are having. Everybody's on food lines, from the poor to the rich on food lines. People are not paying their mortgage. They're not paying their rent, car notes, all those, everybody's affected. So then how do we go forward together instead of looking at one another and saying, well, this person may, no, we're all in it together and we're not going back. And one last point I want to bring to my farm worker people. Honey, y'all are not farm workers. Y'all are farmers who work. Because when they do most of the work, they are the farmers, and we need to put them up on a pedestal and say, and I hate to use that word farm workers, because I'd rather say they're farmers that work, because they are doing most of the work of growing food. And so my hat goes off to anyone who's out there. I know what you do. I see I see you, and I want to thank you for what you're doing out there.
Thank you for that, Karen. I feel like we could go on this track of conversation for a couple more hours, but KODA did invite people to submit questions. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but there are a couple crucial ones that I just want to address here. First is a question about whether New York City will bring back its composting program. And I'm very happy to say that the New York City Department of Sanitation has already restarted its composting program. You can find your drop-off locations and composting updates at nyc.gov/drop-food-scraps. Okay, drop food scraps. So please, I definitely encourage anyone who is looking for an entry point. Composting is a wonderful entry point, and it's also a wonderful metaphor for, you know, taking what we think is something unusable and actually using that to nourish our communities. So speaking of that idea of nourishing our communities, we have a question coming in from a listener right now asking, what's the next step for someone who's passionate about this topic? Let's go back to this idea of entry point. So someone who's listening now, you know, might well agree with everything that's been said, and they want to get involved. This could be me last year. I had never grown food before in my life, you know, live in an apartment here in Bed-Stuy. We have like a tiny little concrete, you know, front yard with a little patch of dirt. I mean, where do we start if we don't have access to land and we may not have resources to buy farmland? But we want to start, right? We have to start somewhere. So Karen, do you have some advice for someone who's really passionate and wants to start somewhere? Oh, you're muted again. Yes, thanks.
Everyone could be an educated consumer. Ask questions at your local grocery store. Ask food, exactly where does the food come from, and support the local economy. For so many years, folks, we have seen our money being extracted. We buy everything out of our community. We bank out of our community. We work out our community. Transportation is out of our community. And so I want people to start thinking locally. How do you support local businesses, food businesses, restaurant businesses, artists, musicians, everything locally? You can start with that.
Okay, amazing. Here's another question from someone who's listening now. How can I, as a teacher, help guide students toward activism for environmental, racial, and food justice? I will, maybe I'll direct that question to you again, Karen, because I think this is very related to the work that you did in New York City, that you have been doing there.
Yes, we need to start looking at the history around food. Like I said, I grew up not knowing about my history, you know, my participation as African-American in the food system. And I think if, you know, we have scars. It's hard to read, but we need to have those hard conversations on how we got to where we are now. What happened during slavery, how land was stolen, who were the first to do a lot of the cuisines that we have. And also I tell school teachers, you know what, you know, have your students have that international day where they bring different food from their cultures, and they sit down and they talk about how that food came to life within their culture, the meaning behind it. And then also sometimes have some farmers, some guest speakers come into the class so people can talk about their experience, not only farmers, but artists, people like Lina, musicians. That is so, so important. Again, we've lost the culture aspect, and that culture is not about farming, but it's about art. It's about music. It's about poetry. It all intersects, and you can start with that.
Yeah, I definitely think that art has a really important role to play here. And I just want to touch on this idea of everybody doing their part, using your own unique skills. You know, you may actually not be destined to be a farmer. Maybe your talent and your energy is in art, for example. So I think Lina's a great example of someone who is doing her part in her way, using her talents to raise awareness, to shine a spotlight on farmers, and to highlight, I think, what the problems are with our food systems, and also highlight the beauty of these indigenous traditions that have survived the violence of the system and continue to be passed along through generations of farmers. So
If I may add,
yes, please.
I think several things that I think about this, because I live in an apartment that I don't have no access to land or to growing anything. And one thing that I am very mindful of is waste, food waste. When I think it's about having respect, a little more respect towards nature and food. Food is nature, you know. And so when you buy your groceries, if you can, hopefully locally, and when you buy them, try to think about all what went through to get that celery to your table, you know, or that potato. And if you can't consume it, consume only buy what you can eat only. Don't buy more, don't waste. Freeze, canned, compost. Have acknowledge the plants, acknowledge the people who cared for those plants. We all should be caring for them. But if we all can be farmers at this, I think in the future we all should be. But if we all can be farmers, let's be mindful of everything that all of the living plants and the living beings that care for it. That is just one. And also one other thing for people in education, look into indigenous, Aboriginal, all cultures that are pre-capitalist movement. Look at their relationship to the land. Look at your ancestors. We were much more in tune with the stars, with, I mean, the people in rural areas, they know when to harvest, they know when the rain is coming. You know, we have lost all of that. It would be great to bring this into the classrooms. We need it, actually. We all need it. So just something to think about.
Beautifully expressed. Thank you, Lina. So just to kind of close the circle, we encourage people to be really mindful about the food that you purchase and consume. And it's a way really of honoring the labor and the effort of all of the farmers who grew that food, and also honoring the land on which that food was grown. Taking a first step by, asking where your food comes from, examining the food chain that leads to your table, getting involved in your local community garden, for example. And if you have a small patch of land, or even a windowsill with some good light, trying to grow something yourself. I have so much appreciation now for the magic that farmers do now that I have gone through a cycle of growing tomatoes. The first sort of cold day that we had in fall, I almost cried because I kept thinking, like, there are like 9 Paul Robeson heirloom tomatoes ripening on the vine right now. What's going to happen to the texture with this cold weather? And, you know, then, I mean, I'll never look at a tomato the same way again. Now that it's on my table, I understand all of the care that it took to get there. Encouraging your, you know, your school teachers, if you have children or young ones in your life, for example, to focus on environmental education, and to really start with that local connection and then build to global. We have just a small plug on the Rainforest Alliance website. We actually do have a very rich environmental curriculum from K through 12. So that's a good place to start. And then building upon that to look at Indigenous practices and also look at the histories of all of the peoples really who live here and their relationship to land and to nature. So sorry, I've gone a minute over already, but hopefully I've summed up some of the action steps that people can take. And I just wanted to say thank you, Karen, and thank you, Lina. I have learned so much from both of you in our conversations last week, and especially today. I feel really fired up and inspired. So I thank you both for being in conversation with me today. And thank you, Claudia and KODA, for bringing together this, this group of people and for allowing us to chat together for an hour.
Thank you very much. Such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Jungwon, Karen, and Lina, for this urgent conversation. And thank you everybody who has joined us today. For the upcoming holiday season, I would like to, on top of everything that we discussed, I would like to wish everyone to prioritize and practice self-care. We would be grateful if you could share your feedback in the survey that will appear as you leave the event. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.